Hello, and welcome to another episode of Yell Fire Conversations to Combat the Lie of White Supremacy. I'm your host, Craig Pelkey Landis, random white dude, author, ghostwriter, etc., etc. I'm excited to get into the conversation today. My guest today is Kevin Henry. Kevin P. Henry brings more than 30 years of experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, public relations, consulting, and broadcasting. From 1994 to 2015, Kevin created and managed the Diversity Advantage program in Bellevue, Washington, helping to shape one of the region's earliest diversity initiatives. His past roles have included communications manager for the American Red Cross of Hawaii, inclusion specialist for Volunteers of America, Western Washington, among others. Kevin is also an independent journalist, so that's another kind of connection between the two of us. He's contributed to multiple publications and has produced public affairs programming for KBCS FM 91.3. With an emphasis on storytelling, he produces podcasts and videos for businesses and organizations. Kevin also hosts his own podcast, All the Way Authentic, where he explores issues of identity, culture, lifestyle, and leadership. So again, excited to get into this conversation with Kevin. Thanks for being here. Please like, subscribe, all that. Rate it positively if you can. Thanks for tuning in to Yell Fire. Well, Kevin Henry, welcome to Yell Fire. So excited to have you here. Um, and before we jump in, I want to give a shout out to Amanda Solar, who introduced us. So, fellow podcaster. So, shout out to Amanda.
Yes,
Kevin,
shout out
yes.
to her.
Welcome. Excited to get started with this conversation. Kevin, just if you could just start out by giving us a quick introduction, who you are, your work in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, and just a little bit about your background. Be great.
Right. Well, I like to tell people that I started off in the diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging field I guess it's been about 35 years ago. And that's when we just had the D. There was just diversity. There was this new thing called diversity. And before that, it had been referred to as affirmative action and multicultural affairs and those
Yeah,
kinds
yeah,
of
yeah.
things. And so, fortunately, in Seattle, Washington, around 1993, I got a job with the city of Bellevue. Bellevue is a suburb of Seattle, and I became their first diversity manager, basically, of a program that's now called the Diversity Advantage Program. And I stayed there for 20 years.
Okay.
And since I left the city of Bellevue in 2015, I've had my own consulting business, training business. I've always been a journalist because that's kind of how I started. So I'm always podcasting or doing presentations about issues related to diversity for a variety of audiences.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we have that in common. I have kind of a journalism background as well that I kind of keep, yeah, like this, like doing the podcast, things
That's
like
great.
that. Yeah. So that's cool. I want to dig in a little bit to the Bellevue experience. I'm curious about the name and just your experience there. So it evolved into the diversity. I love that name, Diversity Advantage, because
Right.
that speaks to
Yeah.
the power of diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. And so tell me, it's kind of fill us in a little bit about how the program started and how where you left it, and kind of fill in a few
Right.
of those
Right.
gaps there.
Okay, great. Well, it started off as the diversity. Actually, it started off as the cultural diversity program, and shortly thereafter,
Mm,
we realized that diverse culture is just one slice of the pie, so to speak. I mean, there's
hmm.
sexual orientation, there's religion, there's ethnicity, there's all of these
Yeah.
different dimensions of diversity. And so by the time I had left, it had morphed into the Diversity Advantage program. And we really liked the word advantage because There's always people that, and even there's even articles I've seen where people are talking about the disadvantages of diversity because
Yeah, yeah,
it creates, there's language differences and there's, you're from a different background and I'm from, and that can be a barrier in the workplace to us communicating and working together, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah, yeah.
But in view of the changing demographics of the country over the last 30 years,
Hmm.
we really wanted to emphasize that having different people in the workplace, in the community, creates an advantage because you
Yeah.
get all these different perspectives and lived
Hmm.
experiences that can
Hmm.
influence how, your community evolves or if you're in business, how your company evolves.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, this is a little bit of a tangent, but part of my background, I used to be a pastor way back in the way
Oh,
back.
okay.
And
Um,
well, one of the I took a in seminary I took a class on church planting, and one of the things we talked about was they called it the homogeneous unit principle. So the theory was people are more comfortable with people who are like them. So you should start a church and attract people, just similar people. Um, and this was in the like mid 90s, and at the time I was like, that's I don't know, but now
mhm.
it's comes in sharper relief, and the advantage of diversity, of diverse ideas, of diverse backgrounds, of diverse and the power of those perspectives. Um, I think it's hard to measure that. Um, I wonder, so in your work now, in your consulting, I don't know if you do measure, how do you measure that? One of the things I'm wondering is resistance. Like the default for a lot of people is that homogeneous unit, being comfortable with just people like me. So how do you overcome that when you're starting out with a group? And the project is diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. And maybe some people feel kind of pressured to be there, like it's a company program that they've got to go to. How do you like overcome some of those challenges to buy in and just even be in there?
Right. Well, we used to call it the business case for diversity.
Hmm.
And for me, it's like giving people a reality check. I mean, I'll give you an example. I had a client, it was a really big firm in Seattle, and they called me in for the mandatory training for their managers and executives, most of whom were white. They had some people of color working there. And I found out later that the executive director didn't even feel there was a need for it. That, oh, we don't need to,
Oh,
get into all
yeah.
that woke stuff and, everything's fine. And
Yeah.
then I did three different sessions and I got emails from people of color who work there that were telling me I'm ready to quit
Mm.
because the management, it's a good old boys network. I feel isolated. I don't feel
Yeah.
valued. I heard about some remarks where they were entertaining clients who were making sexist remarks about the women who
Hmm.
worked there, and nothing
Hmm.
was being done. And so I tell people, I give them some data, I give them analogies, or I give them example case studies of people leaving organizations, whether or not they think there's a problem there or not. When your employees say, I don't feel valued, I don't feel heard, I'm going somewhere else. I've worked in HR departments and done a lot of offboarding interviews.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I would say one nonprofit in particular, I must have interviewed about 25 different people. I would say easily 90% of them told me the reason why I'm leaving is not because of the pay, not because of the commute, not because of I love my job, but I don't feel valued. I don't feel
Hmm.
heard. My
Hmm.
manager is toxic. I'm hearing constant microaggressions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And unfortunately, I think people shy away from discomfort. These conversations about
Hmm.
race and
Hmm.
sexism or homophobia or what have you make people feel uncomfortable. So they try and think of reasons not to have them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so how do you help
Mhm.
individuals, organizations past that discomfort and into those
Mhm.
kind of challenging conversations?
Well, one approach that I have is I think a lot of people who are resistant, and I'm not saying everyone, because there are some people who are just racist people, or they don't
Right, right,
like
right,
gay
right.
people, or what have you. But I think
Yeah.
a large portion of people are ignorant, and I say that not in a disparaging way, because I'm ignorant about a lot of things. It just means you don't know certain things about certain things. I don't
Right.
know anything about farming. I'm very ignorant when it comes to farming. Okay,
Sure.
so what happens though is that people want to get into this colorblind thing of, well,
Hmm.
Craig, and you're just another human being and all. um
Yeah.
and the reality of it is that the differences are there. But what you need to know to alleviate some of that fear is information. I'm not there
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of times I come in and I start off a training and I tell people, look, I'm not here to tell you what to think, what to do, how you should feel, but I will provide you with a lot of information about things you know very little about.
Hmm.
Some of
Hmm.
them are historical. Some of them are, why do we have an employees group that's very upset because of that memo that went out? Let's talk
Hmm.
about why that happened. I'm not saying you're a bad person. So I
Yeah.
try and alleviate some of the defensiveness, because I
Hmm.
think, unfortunately, some trainers have taken the other tact of saying, look, Craig, you know what your problem is, that kind of thing. And I always believe
Yeah.
that you don't tell people, you show them.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so
Right.
that tends to break down some of the barriers. The other thing I always mention is that nobody has the same DNA. We're all diverse.
Hmm. Hmm.
Some people might say, well, you got a bunch of white guys in the room. Well, they're all diverse. So you got one white guy that grew up in Chicago, you got another white guy who grew up in the mountains,
Yeah.
and then there's
Yeah, yeah.
socioeconomic diversity and all that. So I really
Hmm.
try and break that down to make people feel like, hey, I'm part of the equation here.
Yeah. Awesome. That's cool. So I'm a storyteller by trade. I'm a ghostwriter and I'm an author. And I understand storytelling informs your work in some ways. So how does storytelling inform your work? And follow-up question is how do you
Mhm.
connect your own or others' lived experience? So the
Right.
storytelling, like you have a story about your experience that you relate. How do you connect that to the systemic challenges that diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging
Right.
initiatives are meant to address?
Well, the first part of your question I'll answer by saying that some of my clients I produced podcasts for instance.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there was one of my clients was the Northwest Agriculture Business Center. They work
Hmm.
with a lot of immigrant farmers. There's a lot of controversy around immigrants, and
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
again a lot of ignorance. There's some people that think all these people, if you say the word immigrant, they automatically think Hispanic or Latino, and they think
Yeah,
they're
yeah, yeah.
illegal. So what we did was we went and interviewed actual immigrant farmers who talked about why they came here, what their lives are like, how hard they work, and that started to produce more empathy in our listeners,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
I remember after 9/11, I worked at the city of Bellevue then. And I remember, there was a lot of hostility and suspicion directed at Muslims.
Hmm.
Muslims were
Hmm.
being attacked, and even in Seattle, people were being
Hmm.
harassed and
Hmm.
whatever. And I didn't really know very many Muslims, but I made it a point of getting to know my Muslim neighbors. And
Yeah.
we even had an event called Meet Your Muslim Neighbor, so that people could sit down and eyeball each other and find
Yeah,
out how
yeah.
much they had in common. So
Hmm.
I think we've done it in a live setting. I've done it a lot on the internet where we just bring
Hmm.
people in and say, hey, what was it like for you as the only Asian person growing up in a cornfield in Iowa?
Yeah.
Because some people
Yeah.
might not ever, they might think, what's the big deal? Right. But if
Right.
you're
Right.
if
Right.
you're a Japanese adopted child trying to grow up in that environment, it's
Hmm.
going to be much
Hmm. Hmm.
different than, say, the white person who's indigenous to Iowa, so to speak.
Right. Right. Right.
So,
Right.
so I think people start to go, wow, I didn't know that. Wow, I can
Hmm.
see how somebody would be upset about something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I try to do that too in just conversations, and I'm connected with a decolonization organization with Indigenous folks. Just connecting, lived experience to help people understand. Well, this is why this is why this is so challenging, because it's not just this one person's experience. This is connected to the wider systems that oppress
Right.
or make them feel like they are that otherize people. So
Well, and
yeah.
I wanted to add too, you mentioned about systemic. And I remember there was I'll use an example. There was a police chief named Norm Stamper, who was a white guy, white police chief of Seattle. I would say probably around 2004, 5, 6, right in there, who wrote a
Hmm.
book and talked about how he said that he knew that his white officers racially profiled black people in
Right.
Seattle.
Hmm.
He says if they tell you, and this is in his book, if they tell you anything different, they're lying. So systemic
Wow.
issues to somebody else might say, well, all you got to do is be nice to the cops when they pull you over,
Right.
and then you won't have a problem. But if you're hiring people, like if you have a police chief, for instance, that hires the people with the same attitude, then it becomes a
Hmm.
systemic issue
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
goes through the department like an infection.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And so, systemic is very insidious because it's not always obvious.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I ask, this is kind of a question I ask all my guests, but so where are you finding hope today? So in this era of MAGA, where there seems to be it the a movement, a political movement, and people in office who are standing in direct and even violent opposition to diversity, equity, inclusion, and
Right.
belonging.
That I
Um,
appreciate that question. Yeah,
yeah,
well, not to put people in boxes, but I feel like
yeah,
with that
yeah.
situation, you have certain people that are just they're going to dig their heels in. It doesn't matter what proof you come up with, what video you show them, they have decided I'm going to stick with this particular administration and condone anything that
Mhm.
they do short of, I don't know, some horrible atrocity. Then there's
Yeah,
another group, though, and these are the group that, again, I think are so uninformed.
yeah,
If somebody, it's like if you grew up in a household where, and I've seen this happen, where your parents, everybody around you is telling you, Mexicans are this
right.
and Catholics are that, and these people over here, it becomes you become brainwashed. And I think the
Yeah.
only thing that can counter that, again, is not chastising people and calling them names, but giving them new information. And I have
Yeah.
had people like the other day, I couldn't believe it on social media. Some person who was in opposition to me actually said, I never looked at it that way. You're right.
Mm,
Because
yeah.
I gave them additional information about
Hmm.
something that they didn't know. And I think, unfortunately, for various reasons, people live in a bubble, and they have this check the
Hmm.
box mentality. It's, I'm a good person. I've got one
Hmm.
black
Hmm.
friend. I've got one gay friend. My sister
Right.
married a Mexican. I'm
Right.
good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
just like you don't, Craig, represent all the other, I don't know, 25, 30, 40 million white guys,
Right.
for me to say, well, my one friend Craig told me, my one white
That's
friend
right.
said, now I know,
Yeah.
he represents all the other
That's
white guys, would be
right.
absurd. So I
Yeah,
think just
exactly.
educating people, but unfortunately, sometimes you have to push the envelope and make them actually listen
Hmm.
because they don't think, well, why should I care? This doesn't affect
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's so important because there's the Stephen Millers and
me.
Russ Votes of the world who are, ideologically driven to, overt white nationalism. But then
Mhm.
there's these other people who, just want lower grocery prices and heard somebody promise that and said, okay, yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's go for that. So I listen to a lot of politics podcasts, and these are there's gettable people. There's ideologues, and then there's gettable people. There's
Hmm.
people you can talk to and share stories and reason with and connect. So yeah, I think
Right.
that's really important, not to just write people off because they voted a certain way, or even have even express certain ideas that may be informed from or ill-informed out of ignorance. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Right.
that's
Right.
super important. Um, cool, cool, cool. This is an maybe out of left field question, but
I'm ready. I'm ready.
it's so uh, in preparation for our meeting, you shared some really powerful spoken word audio clips, like "A Day in My Skin." Um, how did that practice come about? Is that something new? Is that you have a voice? I was listening to it, and you said, "I bet you could probably make a good living doing voiceover work." So,
I do that
okay,
sometimes.
cool, cool, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
usually I'm the voice of authority. I'm usually telling
Mm.
people to do
Right,
something
right,
or
right,
trying
yeah,
to get them to donate money to something. Um, well, thank you for the question. Yeah, well, I've always loved poetry. I've always
yeah.
loved. I'm the kid that would read the lyrics on the back of albums back in the
Yeah,
70s and say, "What is he
yeah.
saying? What does it mean?" So I'm fascinated with words, and quite honestly, it was somewhat therapeutic because I felt like I have to navigate these different social circles that are very diverse in not always the best way.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of code switching that I have to
Mm.
do. But yet a
Yeah, yeah.
lot of, I guess, frustration was building up. And I said, I need an outlet that isn't like me just like yelling and screaming at somebody. And,
Hmm.
but trying to get them to look at what is it like to live, a day in my skin? Because I
Hmm.
remember when, and they still use the term white privilege gets everybody been out of shape sometimes.
Yeah.
And some white people would tell me, well, I grew up poor and I had a struggle, and I'm saying, hey, I totally empathize with that.
Hmm.
I said, but
Hmm.
if a lot of times your struggles were directly related to how much money you didn't have in the bank.
Hmm.
If somebody came in and said, Craig, I know you're dirt poor and they're turning out your lights, but here's a $500,000, your life changed.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
cannot change my skin color. I can be
Right,
the
right,
richest
right.
black person in the world and still be targeted and attacked
Hmm.
solely based on that, which is something
Yeah,
I can't change. So
yeah.
I said, a lot of people, you live in, especially in this area, which is pretty liberal, people get very, oh, Seattle, it's very liberal, blah, blah, blah. I said, when I go to Montana, rural Montana, and I'm seeing Confederate flags and I'm
Hmm.
seeing a bumper sticker, this is when Biden was still running, that said, what is it? F Biden and his hoe and things like that.
Oh,
I
yeah,
said,
yeah.
I'm surrounded by these. I said, I could just wait 20 minutes and go find an article about Nazis marching in broad daylight through some Midwestern town. I said,
Yeah,
so imagine if you know, your biggest fear was marching down the street
yeah,
and people were
yeah, yeah,
going, oh, that's perfectly fine. How would you feel safe?
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
why I said the day in my skin, because it's just like domestic violence survivor. I mean, it could apply
Hmm.
to anyone, really, that's
Yeah,
just trying to get that empathetic response out of someone.
right, right. Yeah. Well, and it goes back to the power of storytelling and
Mhm.
how, yeah, that informs. your work and yeah, how yeah, it connects people and the power of empathy, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, cool. Um, well, is there anything I missed? Or are there any projects you have going that you want to talk about, or parting thoughts that you'd like to share?
Well, I appreciate that. The only thing I would ask people to do if they want more information about, my spoken word or training, and I do training across the country. I mean, I do a lot of it online actually with for
Hmm.
clients that are on the East Coast, for instance. I'm on the West Coast.
Sure.
They can go to kevinphenry.com
Okay.
and
Yep. I'll
check it
put that.
out. And other than that, I would just say that I just think that empathy connected with educating everyone, me,
Hmm.
everyone, we
Hmm.
all, there's so much we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
knowledge is power. And I think that's
Mhm.
where the change is going to come by people learning things that will empower them,
All right.
educate and
Yeah.
empower them.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll put stuff in the show notes. And thanks so much for your time. Hey, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in to this episode of Yell Fire. If you want more details about Kevin, they'll be in the show notes here. And if you want even more details, more nuance and all that, please subscribe to the newsletter, Yellfire. Sorry. Yellfire.substack.com. And yeah, I appreciate you. Please like and subscribe and tell your friends about Yell Fire. All right. Take care.